Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton, Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, January 23rd, 2020. What are we on? Day 2 of opening arguments. Day sort of 3 of the trial, I guess. Even though, well, whatever. Anyway, that's the way things work in the Senate. We'll be back on with the House managers. I don't know exactly what their plans are. I hope their plans are to take all 24 hours or nearly all 24 hours and spread out across the 3 days. I think that would be the wise thing to do. They're doing pretty well by all reports, and I think the 3-day rule would entitle them to take up all of today and all of tomorrow, Friday, which would leave it to Saturday for the Republican or for the president's defense team to respond. They would, by the normal rules of impeachment, be in session on Saturday. They would be out of session on Sunday because God, well, at least one form anyway of God. Anyway, and then back, I guess they would be entitled to the rest of their 24 hours across Monday and Tuesday. I have questions. I am very interested to know whether the president's team plans to take all 24 hours or whether they plan to give one stem winder of a speech and then say that's all there is to it. We're just denying that this happened. And if we're forced to accept that it did happen, then we deny that it was a crime or impeachable or whatever it is. I don't know exactly which tack or both that they'll take. I do have in front of me the comments of Senator Mike Braun. Is it Braun or does he say Brown? He might say Brown. I don't know. B-R-A-U-N. I don't know. I never heard of this guy. I mean, he's a senator from Indiana, and I don't mean to be rude to the people of Indiana, but that guy is a non-entity to me and probably to the rest of you. Anyway, apparently he's tweeting around his comments at a brief presser during one of the breaks yesterday. I happened to catch him making those remarks live at the time, and I do remember thinking, is this guy a staffer or what? I'm not sure. You know, they took one of the breaks during the day, and a couple of Republican senators ran to the TV gallery, I guess, to give some remarks, because you're not supposed to do it in the hallway outside of the Senate. And I don't know. There was a couple of senators there, not all of them familiar to me. But at any rate, he went last. And whoever his Senate colleague was who went before him wanted to let everybody know that they were being called back in. And I guess, of course, now he hogged up all the time. And then it was time to leave because they were being called back in to session. And I couldn't tell at first whether it was him just saying, well, I'm going to be the last one that speaks because, you know, they've called us back in and I used up all the time and I'm going to get my picture taken and be on TV. Whether it was that sort of selfish thing or whether it was something else. But let's see. What he is, he's tweeting around his own comments, and I saw Kevin Cruz out there saying, I can't believe you're tweeting this around. You think this makes you look good, which is amazing. The reporter had asked, the reporter asked, so you're saying that it's okay for a president to ask a foreign leader to investigate a political rival and withhold foreign aid to coerce him into doing so? And this Senator Brown, however he says it, says, no, I'm not saying that's okay. I'm not saying that's appropriate. I'm saying it didn't happen, which was amazing. I mean, we knew that eventually some Republicans anyway were going to come around to this conclusion. If they were uncomfortable saying that coercing a foreign government to do this stuff is not okay with them, then they were just going to deny that it happened. And but he's one of the few Republican senators who've been willing to say that, I guess. And it's rather amazing to watch. And he thinks I mean, maybe in Indiana that works. I don't know. But what I thought was really hilarious was I said I saw that these remarks being made live on TV. I wasn't there myself. But whoever his Senate colleague was who went before him, not only did he say, well, we're being called back in, so we've got to go. As he's walking off the stage, he pauses momentarily, and he physically reaches his arm back, like trying to put an arm around Braun Brown's shoulder here to bring him along, like, come on, we got to go. But in that sort of way, I couldn't tell entirely what was going through his mind, obviously, but maybe nothing. But it looked an awful lot like, oh, golly, he's still hanging around here, and he really doesn't know how to talk to the press. Come with me. We're being called back, and he's reaching out to physically, and he's standing with his arm just dangling out there, and for an uncomfortably long period of time, until finally he's like, I give up, man. He's just not coming. And again, I saw him pull this stunt, and that's weird. My Skype is ringing, Greg, on every other channel or every other computer but the one I wanted to call you on. Let me try and give you a call back. I don't know why it's working on every other computer but not this one. But at any rate, he was trying to get Braun Brown to leave, and he wouldn't do it, as if he knew he was going to say something this embarrassing, which was really weird. I just didn't expect to see that happen. And of course it was hilarious. And then the results are what they were. It's as if he knew that was going to go. All right. Well, I'm getting the audio signal that I missed your call on this computer. So I guess that means that if I try to call you, there it is. Okay. Okay, Greg, this time it worked just fine, I think.
Hi.
Hi. How you doing? I don't know. My computer was asleep because it's been up late watching the impeachment.
Well, it's not that you picking up the phone or not picking up the phone is right or wrong.
Right.
It just didn't happen.
We don't condone it I'm just saying that's not what, it was really something. Do you know if that guy is Braun or Brown?
Braun, Mike Braun.
Braun, okay. Well, anyway.
I know this in two ways. I looked it up on Twitter for a pronunciation guide, and then I checked on Hugh Hewitt's show where he was a guest.
Very good.
And Hewitt announced him as Mike Braun. I'm voting for Mike Braun. I endorse Mike Braun.
Oh, yeah? He was voting for Bernie Sanders, too, as it turns out. He's not. Wait a minute. He's not. You just say endorsed, right? He's not voting for Mike Braun because Mike Braun's from Indiana, and he says he's from Virginia.
Whatever. So the important thing is he mentioned his name on the air so I could verify that in this particular case, the internets were actually correct.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear we got it right. But it was. I mean, it was kind of shocking to see. But Republicans.
That was pretty amazing, actually, because you really. I mean, I saw the video. I saw the comment. He posted it himself.
Yeah.
It's like Martha McSally saying, "Look at me, badge of honor." And I had to check the video to make sure the guy didn't have pencils in his ears and cucumbers over his eyes, because you really have to not be paying attention to what happened yesterday to come out with that.
Or for the last year, really. But
yesterday, where it was all summarized in front of your nose, where you were supposed to be required to look and listen.
Oh, well, they're not doing that. And that's also a big story today.
I get the idea, and they had said this several times. I understand. Chris Murphy said this. A lot of other people said this. We're out, and Ted Cruz said it. We're out doing senatorial things, being senators, doing our senator job. So naturally, we didn't have time to waste watching the every moment of the House hearings. So for a lot of us, this is the first time we're seeing this stuff.
Oh, but they said there was nothing new.
Well, according to Mike Braun, he didn't even see this
nothing.
stuff.
Yeah, not only that it's not new, there was nothing there.
There's nothing there. I mean, there's a blank screen, and apparently my translator, microphone was off because I couldn't understand anything. They were speaking, coastal. They weren't even speaking. And I speak Midwest, and I just couldn't understand a word of it.
Maybe he didn't think they showed up. I went to the trial. The managers didn't show up. They didn't come to present the case. I don't know what happened.
Now, I know people will get mad at this, but I just thought it was very funny. I was watching Twitter the other day, not today, but maybe a few days ago, where everybody from Illinois and places like that were saying, by the way, you have to understand that a baseline for those of us who live out here is that everybody hates Indiana.
All right. Well, they're the ones
who
screw
it's a
up
given.
The time, I think.
It's like, St. Louis doesn't like Chicago. I mean, it's like Boston doesn't like New York.
Well, nobody likes
so
Indiana.
I get that. Speaking of which, Boston not liking New York, Derek Jeter is in the Hall of Fame, except one guy voted against him. And now is too much of a coward to identify who he is.
Huh.
Obviously a Boston Red Sox fan.
I guess so. Well, yeah, I don't know. That's odd. It's odd that they keep track of those things.
Anyway, back to reality here. I saw this morning, and I just heartily endorse it, so I'm just telling you now. John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum has a little form online where you can submit a nomination for a Profile and Courage Award.
Is that in Boston?
Probably.
I'm not doing it.
No, it could be. Isn't the JFK Presidential Library? Where is it? Learn. Visit museum.
Nantucket.
Where is it? Well, they don't tell you where it is, so you can't go.
That's it, right? So
it's in Boston. It's at Columbia Point.
See, not going.
They have a foreign affairs a school there, among other things. But I'm not nominating Mike Braun or suggesting that you do. But I did nominate, and maybe you'll think about nominating Ambassador Yovanovitch, and it's not difficult.
I nominate Mike Braun.
You can go there and just fill out the form, and it takes a few seconds, and why not? She deserves it.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Sounds like she'll get a couple of nominations on that front. So
anyway, sure. Politico has a story of yesterday, and I think it was awfully interesting. Awfully interesting. Awful.
The worst. You're right.
Democrats unload overwhelming, quote unquote, that's scare quotes, impeachment case on the Senate, even as they press for more. House managers work to balance their case with urgent pleas for new witnesses and documents. I saw the lawyers on Twitter complimenting the House managers and Adam Schiff in particular for a brilliant presentation. Basically said, look, this is what happened. And how do we know this? Because people said this document shows that, wouldn't you like to see this document? And we also know that Ambassador Bolton said, because one of his advisors told us this under oath, wouldn't you like to hear from Ambassador Bolton himself about what you could? All you have to do is subpoena him. And then this other thing happened over here, and it's a pretty important memo. It was referred to here. Wouldn't you like to see that memo? You could have that memo. All you have to do is vote for subpoenaing these documents.
Yeah.
And, it was a really effective presentation, so much so. Lindsey Graham actually complimented Adam Schiff afterwards. You were very well spoken. And to the point where this was actually funny, Matt Gaetz, crazy Matt Gaetz, said the Democrats presented their case like it's cable news. That was a compliment. But lamented Trump's case was presented more like an 8th grade book report. Actually, no, I take that back, he said, because an 8th grader would actually know how to use PowerPoint and iPads.
I take that back. That was pretty 8th grade himself, really.
Yeah. So he's pretty mad because he wasn't on the Trump team.
Yes. Well, he quit the Trump team. I mean, he didn't
Well, he
think
was kicked off the Trump team.
Right. I mean, that's quitting. You know that if you say something bad, you're going to get kicked off.
Yeah, and they made disparaging remarks about him and so on and so forth. Anyway, it was awfully interesting there. So they did a very powerful presentation. Each one of the impeachment managers honed in on a specific thing. Val Demings, Jason Crow, they all had really good presentations, although Schiff was absolutely masterful. Again, not my opinion alone, but many of the people who watched it. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched most of it yesterday. I thought it was more interesting than the day before. I happen to think policy is more interesting than process, but process is important and sometimes compelling. It tells you a lot about what's going on. And so for the process folks amongst us, and I do count myself with a foot in that camp, thanks to your teaching, of how important it is. Whoever controls the gavel controls the meeting, except if you're John Roberts, because he's just too afraid to do anything. And that's okay. That's not unexpected. It's kind of set up that way. I like to think of John Roberts, again, based on your teaching, as if he's the parliamentarian.
Okay.
Sure, you could rule against the majority party, and then they could fire you.
Yeah, well, that's true.
So what's the point? If you want to stay there, you're not going to do that.
Well, right. They won't fire him necessarily, but they'll just overrule him at every turn, and it'll be embarrassing for somebody.
Everybody. Except Mike Braun, who said, that didn't happen.
Yeah. He's not embarrassed by anything, apparently. But knowing Roberts, who he is, I mean, he's just not going to insert himself for anything he doesn't have to. I mean, I
Right.
guess he
Remember,
felt safe
he
yelling
clerked
at
for
people.
William Rehnquist, and Rehnquist's famous line, misquoting it, is something along the lines of, "I did nothing, and I did it very well." And that's his model.
Yeah, he's going to stay out of it. I mean, it's an embarrassing situation. I could see, if I guess if I were the Chief Justice, I too would try and be relatively hands off. This is the Senate. It's not my place. I'm mandated to be here by the Constitution. If anything goes seriously wrong, I guess I'll do something. But, you're going to try and stay
believe
out
me,
of
I
their
know the
way.
feeling. I've chaired committees where, like, I don't want to be here, and please don't let
Why
anything
me?
because it's like my responsibility.
Right. Don't want to do anything wrong. You don't want to overstep your bounds.
Yeah.
So, whatever. Okay.
Of course, that was in the context of committees where things went horribly wrong, and it was my responsibility.
Oh, well,
to do
that's
something
true.
about it.
I suppose if you've risen to the pinnacle of your profession and you're a constitutional officer, you might say, I might know what I'm doing. I could speak up if I wanted to.
Right. If you want a really, really solid case of imposter syndrome, where you feel like I really shouldn't be here, and maybe people will find out that my credentials are all bogus and I really shouldn't be doing this, which is the insecurity that professionals have when they're trying to do their job. Just chair a committee where something goes wrong and it's your responsibility.
Yeah, that's bad.
It's like, oh my gosh, I wasn't trained for this.
Yeah, everybody said they were for it. I don't know.
I feel for Chief
up.
Justice Roberts, but not so much. But the point about policy versus process comes up with Jonathan Bernstein, political scientist, in Bloomberg this morning. I thought had a terrific article. One soft cheer for a few Senate Republicans. The impeachment trial would have been even worse if some GOP lawmakers hadn't bucked McConnell and Trump. It's a reminder that things aren't going exactly the way McConnell and Trump wanted. If it went the way McConnell and Trump wanted, the Democrats wouldn't have a full day, mostly during prime viewing hours and not at 1 a.m., to present their case beautifully, strongly, multimedia, in a way that people actually are following. And we know that from the polls. We'll get to that. But if McConnell had his way, it would have been 2 days with a lot of the good stuff at 1 a.m. Instead, it's 3 days with a lot of the good stuff at 8 p.m. when people can watch it.
Yeah.
All right. And in fact, if Trump had his way, it wouldn't be going on at all. It would have been dismissed.
True.
Remember,
also.
Lindsey Graham wanted to just get rid of the whole thing and say, well, we're not even going to do this.
Yeah. Josh
But
Hawley.
then he said, well, we only have 45 votes for that. That means that there were 9 votes on the Republican side that wouldn't go along with that. And that's what Bernstein's referring to here. Only one cheer, he says. The trial leaves much to be desired. The request for witnesses and documents made by impeachment managers from the House of Representatives should be a no-brainer, not something to maybe possibly be granted down the road. And yet, when the Washington Post Robert Costa reported that Republicans were looking to Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee as a key figure on the question of whether there'd be enough votes to allow witnesses, I noticed that reactions on Twitter were united in assuming that Alexander would do whatever Trump and Senate Majority Leader McConnell wanted. Now, I have plenty of criticisms of Alexander and other supposed defenders of the Senate, and he goes on to list all the things they've badly done, including approving clearly unqualified nominees.
Yes.
But he says, I've watched 2 days of the impeachment trial so far. I have too. I agree with him on this. I'm sure of one thing. It's not what Trump wanted. It's almost certainly not what McConnell wanted. In fact, it's not what I and some others feared. A full-on show trial focused on smearing Biden, Pelosi, and any other Democrat who Trump wants to target. There's been a bit of that, and I'm sure there'll be more. Remember what the House did. That's what Trump wanted. Trump wanted Jim Jordan and the nutcases like Doug Collins and Louis Gohmert to smear the Democrats. That's his idea of a trial. That didn't happen. That's not happening.
Not yet. I guess that's
They
I'm
have
wondering what they'll do.
uncontested time today, yesterday. They painted the case of what Trump did was wrong, and here's the documents, and here's the other ones we want.
Yeah.
I presume either today or tomorrow, probably today, they'll start to make the case as, okay, now that we all agree he did those things, and you'd have to be Mike Braun to think he didn't, this is why it's impeachable. This is why he needs to be removed. This is what he threatens for 2020. It's about 2020, not 2016. That's, I presume, what's coming. And they're allowing that to happen. So Bernstein writes, but if those who believe that all Republicans will ruthlessly exploit every opportunity by taking maximum advantage of their partisan power were correct, we'd never have hours and hours of Democratic House managers speaking on the Senate floor and to the TV about Trump's malfeasance. Indeed, if it were up to McConnell, writes Bernstein, I think the only question would be whether he would have dismissed the trial on day one or worse. I don't want to oversell it. The appearance of marginally fair trials is a pretty minimal thing to grant. They haven't stopped McConnell's express train scheduling. And, of course, there's still nothing close to a guarantee of witnesses. So at this point, I'm only giving one cheer. But it's not nothing.
All right. I guess we'll take it. I'm not certain what they'll spend their day 2 or day 3.
They have to make the case that you got to remove them.
Yes.
Because the polls are saying even Republicans agreed did something wrong.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how they
just don't do anything about
decide where they put that in the order. I'm not sure what they would do with day 3, but I'd love to see their plans. And now I'm really curious about what Republicans plan to do. It may be that they just plan to, wrap it up and say it didn't happen and leave, or it may be that they say, well, we have 3 days to level accusations against Hunter Biden, so let's do that.
Well, here's the fancy thing that I think goes along with this, because Jay Sekulow said this in an interview. Basically, the Republican defense team is outmatched and incompetent. And so Sekulow says, well, we don't know what we're going to do. It depends upon what the Democrats do. We'll just, sort of like wing it.
Okay.
And that's how you got to him complaining about lawyer lawsuits.
Yeah, right.
When Val Deming said FOIA, Freedom of Information Act lawsuits.
Yeah.
They don't have a plan, and they look bad. And, again, if you actually watched any part of the House hearings, it was harder to watch because the rules were like 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. But if you watched the lawyer part of it, which was an hour here, an hour there, and so you could do a coherent set of presentations.
Yes, good reminder.
That the Democratic side was this happened, why did this happen, and the Republican side of it was Nancy Pelosi stinks, and besides, her family comes from San Francisco, and look at this, and you guys stink, and so stinky people really can't be saying things bad. It was just awful. It was that level of comparison, and this is like even worse.
All right.
Because it's in the august, deliberative body, supposedly.
Yes.
And what happens is Sekulow and others are just exposed with having no defense. And of course, the Democrats have done a decent enough job of saying, by the way, the people defending Trump are actually witnesses.
True, also. And proceedings interrupted briefly by a presumably right-wing-ish protester yesterday as well.
Yeah, momentarily. I mean, that was not even, it didn't even make a dent.
I liked it.
That was the one, it woke up Roberts, who had to say, Sergeant at Arms, please.
No, something's wrong. It was totally against the rules is happening here, I think. They did a terrific job with him, by the way, bringing him out. The guy had such a voice. He was audible.
I heard he was audible
for a minute.
Out of the chamber.
You're not going to take me out of here. 40 or 50 feral hogs on my head. What? I couldn't make out what he was saying exactly, but he was still out there yelling, like, move him further away. That's not hard. Okay.
So here's Reuters. Poll. Let them speak. That's the headline. Most Americans want witnesses in Trump impeachment trial. Again, this is making the argument that they'll lose in the procedure vote, but they're winning the argument with the American people. A bipartisan majority of Americans want to see new witnesses testify in the impeachment trial of President Donald Trump, and the public appears to be largely following the proceedings, even after a bruising congressional inquiry that lasted several months, according to Reuters Ipsos polling released Wednesday. That would be yesterday.
Okay. That was a good day.
The poll, which ran from the 17th to the 22nd, also showed U.S. public opinion has moved little since the U.S. House of Representatives impeached Donald Trump in mid-December. By the way, the little it's moved has moved in the direction of removing him.
Yes. Well, good.
Okay. So, for example, 57% support removal of office from the MSN tracking poll. That really has unchanged since maybe the 4th of January. And the other tracking poll we use, of course, is our own at Daily Kos, and that is the the civics poll, again, that fluctuates is between 7 and 8 points removal. But 538 has their own panel, which is interesting. It's an Ipsos panel, and they keep going back to it. So they're asking the same people.
Oh, okay.
So you get a chance to see what's going on over time. The latest iteration of our survey with Ipsos, where we use Ipsos Knowledge Panel to poll the same respondents every few weeks, found that a solid majority of 58% continue to think Trump committed an impeachable offense. More than half of Americans also believe there's enough evidence to remove Trump from office for his actions relating to Ukraine, 52%, and for his refusal to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry in efforts to block witnesses from complying with subpoenas, 53%. So that's Article 1 and 2 there. Similarly, a majority, 54% of Americans say they'd approve of the Senate voting to remove him from office. Almost exactly the same share, 55%, oppose the idea of dismissing impeachment charges entirely. But as is the case, big partisan divide. What's interesting, even though the impeachment process is now in its final phase, we still haven't seen big changes in how respondents feel about many of the questions we've been tracking. But in our latest survey, we did see that among people who've responded to all 5 waves of the survey, there's been an ever so slight but statistically significant uptick in the share of respondents who think Trump committed an impeachable offense, from 55% in November to 58% now. It's not huge, and the fact that they responded to all 5 surveys means we can get a pretty detailed picture of how these views have changed over time. And any shift in perspectives on impeachment is noteworthy, too, given how narrowly Americans are divided and how steady their views have been, according to both our polling with Ipsos and tracker of polls that ask about impeachment. So Republicans are increasingly supportive of Trump, but they're losing the independents. Is really why it's changing slightly.
Okay.
Republicans are gathering the wagons. They're circling the wagons. They have to. Yes. Because they realize this is serious, and these are powerful charges that are going on. And so they can't just dismiss them. And we'll look at Pew polling after the break. Aaron Blake nicely wrote that up for the Washington Post.
Speaking of the break, I've forgotten to turn my alarm on, and we've missed her.
You know, that's why I'm looking at the time, and I thought I'd remind you. But, you know, don't try this at home, folks. We are not professionals. At the same time, it's important. And I think that, you know, there's no sign whatsoever that this is helping Trump. It doesn't exist. If anything, it's moving the other direction, even though slightly.
Okay. Well, geez, at this point, I suppose we should just at this point keep going. And we'll try and remind people of what happened in the last minute and a half when we come back. But the podcast listeners will get an additional bonus 2 minutes of discussion.
Okay, so
we can do that.
Let's do the Pew Poll.
All right.
And let's just set that up, and at 9:30 we'll repeat some of it.
Yes.
But let me just give you the headline here. By a narrow margin, Americans say Senate trials should result in Trump's removal. Majority say Trump has definitely or probably done things that are illegal. Mm-hmm. And before going into the details of the poll, which we'll do at 9:30 in a minute, let me just say this reinforces the concept that Democrats are winning the argument, whether or not they win the procedural vote in the Senate as to how things go down there.
Okay. And then
people get that Trump did something wrong. The question on the table is, what do you do about it?
Yes. Well, I know what we should be doing about it, but okay, we have a persuasion job ahead of us.
Yeah, but you know, if you don't persuade the Senate, then you persuade November. Is my point.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good point. It's so good. We should make it again in, I'm going to say, close to 15 seconds.
Well, you know, I can waste 15 seconds in this kind of environment. I just have to interrupt David once, and we're there.
All right. Are you ready to interrupt me then?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, we'll begin
stop talking and let me talk.
All right. And now...
You never let me talk. I don't understand.
Sure. Ordinarily, at this point in the game, I would be A, playing music, and B, welcoming everyone back to the Kagro in the Morning Show, which I am doing for the live listeners. For the podcast listeners, we'll let you in on a little secret, but you won't find out until after the live listeners do. I didn't turn on the alarm, and we didn't take our break. And the breaks are automatic, so you missed the last 2 minutes.
David and I overslept, basically, is what happened.
Yes.
So this Pew Poll, by a narrow margin, Americans say Senate trials should result in Trump's removal. half of U.S. adults, 51%, say the outcome of the Senate trial should be Trump's removal from office. 46% say it should lead to Trump remaining in office. Overwhelming share of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents, 86%, say the trial should result in Trump remaining in office. Remember, that's not 100%, and that's important. And roughly the same share of Democrats and Democratic leaners think Trump should be removed. But 63% of Americans say Trump is definitely, 38%, or probably, 25%, done things that are illegal, either during his time in office or while he was running for president. And a larger majority, 70%, say he's definitely or probably done unethical things, according to the new survey.
I'm for that.
So Democrats are winning the argument about the fact that Trump's a crook.
Good.
Okay. And interestingly, Trump's overall job rating, which is at 40% approved in this particular poll, haven't budged at all. So it's an indication that you can't use job approval as a surrogate for what do you think of the president overall. Because, okay, I approve of what he's doing on the economy, but he's still a crook and ought to be removed. People can think that at the same time, and that kind of nuance doesn't get picked up by simply looking at job approval. Why doesn't job approval move? It's very simple. We saw this with Jimmy Carter. The only way your job approval numbers actually collapse is if your own party abandons you. And we know that that's not happening with the Republican Party and Trump. You shouldn't look for that. That's kind of like not the point. Just follow the independents.
Okay.
And see what they have to say.
There are fewer of them. We should do that.
Right? So, if you look among educational divides, and we'll have some more to say about that, wide educational divides, particularly among whites, on whether Trump should be removed from office. Stay in office, 58, remove him, 41. Those are whites. Blacks, 82, remove, 15, stay. Hispanics, 66, remove, 30% stay. If you're young, that is to say, if you're under 50, you want to remove him. 18 to 29 say 63% get rid of him. 65 and plus, 56% say keep him. Right? Post-grad, 60% say get rid of him. High school or less, 48 split evenly. But among whites, college grads, 53-45 remove. Non-college grads, 34-64 keep. So Trump's base is non-educated white voters. We know this. This doesn't split out evangelicals that I know of, which is too bad because that's really his super base.
Yeah.
But most people think he's probably or definitely engaged in illegal activities. And once you do that,
he only feels good if he is.
That's a big deal for November, whether or not the procedural votes in the Senate go our way.
Yes. All right.
Now, Aaron Blake makes the point, even if Democrats did accuse Trump of a crime, and perhaps even if they prove it,
yes,
it wouldn't be good enough, at least not for Republicans.
Oh, well, yeah, for them.
Okay?
They
the
like
poll
crime.
question, majority of Republicans who say it is likely that Trump committed illegal acts, the majority of Republicans who agree that Trump committed illegal acts, oppose his removal from office.
Okay.
Right? So, okay, you proved your case. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Take that, lib.
Condoning crime to own the libs.
Right? Most of the Republicans and GOP-leaning voters, Aaron Blake writes, importantly, only say Trump has probably committed a crime, rather than definitely, 23-9. Perhaps they don't believe you should be removed from an office based on something isn't completely proved, which is reasonable. That's why Mike Braun is saying, well, he didn't do it, because if I admit he did it, then obviously I have to remove him. Yeah. Maybe a few of them even have more innocuous crimes in mind rather than obstruction of justice or public corruption, but it's also a sizable portion of the Trump base, 1/3, that volunteered to a pollster that they believe a GOP president has broken the law since he entered politics. Oh. And they've come down decisively against removing him. And they also support him. The same poll shows just 18% of Republicans disapprove of Trump.
Yeah.
So half of GOP-leaning voters and Republicans who think Trump has broken the law still don't disapprove of him.
Well, they love crime occasionally.
On the other hand, they are beginning to entertain. This is why adults learn by repetition. You have to keep saying it over and over and over and over again. They're beginning to entertain and accept the fact that he committed a crime.
Okay. I mean, it's progress.
It
Just
is.
to get them to think it's bad, but all
Right. The impeachment trial and the Trump presidency as a whole don't seem to reward nuanced positions, especially on the GOP side. And as Democrats try to woo some of these senators to vote in favor of new witnesses like John Bolton, you can bet all of this will be weighing on the GOP senators' minds. So in their mind, Mike Braun, who's, electorally safe, whether he's running this year or not, can basically just say stuff that's ridiculous knowing that he can get away with it. But Cory Gardner can't, and that's why he's not speaking. That's why you can't find him. That's why he's invisible. Martha McSally is just, committing political suicide.
Well,
she just comes out and says, crap that doesn't fly well at home, but she's not going to find that out till November.
Well, she might be happy to last that long and then, I guess, lobby somewhere, so why not?
Right. Now, the other interesting thing that's happened is the reaction from the enablers about what they're seeing. They can't make the case that, the Democrats are incompetent. Oh, it's stupid. This is Mickey Mouse stuff. They can't. It's too good. It's too strong. It's too powerful. So now what they're resorting to is their go-to that not only did Trump do this, but it doesn't matter. If you actually take steps to do things like remove him, you are overturning the election and the will of the American people.
Yes, right. That's their favorite.
Byron York was tweeting this yesterday and saying, why is everybody dunking on me? Why are you yelling at me? Of course it's true. And everybody with a brain said, actually, it's stupid. No, it's not true. If you remove Donald Trump, it's not like Hillary Clinton becomes president. You didn't overturn the election.
That would be overturning. Yes, true, right?
Mike Pence becomes president.
But I don't want Mike Pence. I want the other guy.
Well, yeah, but that's different than the argument you just made. David Graham, writing in The Atlantic, no, Democrats aren't trying to overturn the 2016 election. A surprisingly durable talking point is wrong in at least 4 ways.
Oh. All right.
Okay. The notion of overturning, this is misinformation and disinformation, and that's why it's important to cover it. The notion of overturning the election has persisted because it's a powerful, though not to say true, piece of messaging. The soundbite shorthand, easily understood, and easily misleads. First, to label the impeachment a brazen and unlawful attempt to invalidate elections is to nullify the very point of impeachment. The Constitution provides for the voters to elect a president every 4 years, but it also provides for Congress to impeach. Secondly, removing Trump from office wouldn't hand the White House to the Democrats. It would hand the presidency to President Mike Pence. They're, of course, using this line because they know Pence is guilty, too. Third, the claim of overturning the will of voters stems from Trump's frequent but baseless assertion of a broad popular mandate. Again, reminder, he didn't win the popular vote.
Right, also.
And finally, and perhaps most simply, impeachment is clearly about the 2020 election, not the previous one. That's why I'm predicting, me personally, that's what the Democrats will hone on when they have the remainder of their time. I yield the balance of my time to one of my colleagues who will point out that this isn't about 2016, it's about 2020, and that anybody using the overturn the election talking point is a moron, and let me explain why. And that's what I expect to happen, if not today, then tomorrow.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
There is naturally great irony in the president's defense team complaining that Democrats are trying to seek political advantage through the impeachment drama. The entire imbroglio started when Trump tried to coerce the Ukrainian government into assisting his own reelection prospects, according to everybody except Mike Braun. Using the power of the government for his personal gain, Democrats are merely using the Constitution's provisions to their own political advantage. In other words, they're following the law.
No, that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, it is. Especially if your complaint is your opponent doesn't follow the law.
Yeah.
Which is to say, he's a crook. But it's a nice way of saying it that John Roberts would approve of.
I think so. Although it depends what time you catch him.
Right. So there's that. And as I finish up, I thought I'd just throw in one other thing. There's a new WBUR poll from a very good pollster, Steve Kozala, although New Hampshire is notoriously difficult to poll.
Yes. Oh, all right.
And this is 29% Sanders, 17% Buttigieg, 14% Biden, 13% Warren. Sanders is doing very well in this poll, but I think more importantly, Warren is not.
Yeah,
okay. Sanders doing particularly well with younger voters in this poll. But the thing I found most interesting is the poll also found, and again, half of these voters, because this is who can vote in a New Hampshire primary, half of them are Democrats and half of them are independents. which is why I find this so interesting. If we're all Democrats, what I'm about to say wouldn't be that interesting.
Oh.
But half of these are independents. The poll also found that big majorities of respondents believe Trump has made the U.S. less safe, oppose a number of his administration policies and actions, including the assassination of General Soleimani.
Okay.
So, again, we don't know, although there is evidence that there's a slow shift, small shift, but significant shift, small though it may be in a very close election in a 50-50 divided nation, toward the Democratic position on impeachment.
Yes.
There is no evidence whatsoever that impeachment will help Trump because everybody knows that. We've said it so often. Why don't you believe us?
You're playing right into his hands, his tiny, tiny hands.
Yeah. Not true. No data.
Okay. Well, that's good. Do they
So
have young people in New Hampshire?
the pollster says with almost 3 weeks to go until the primary, much can change. I wouldn't take these numbers to the bank, but you got to be feeling good about the campaign where you stand right now if you're Sanders. Again, this is a very fluid situation with big shifts, and New Hampshire is very difficult to do. But we got Iowa coming up in less than 2 weeks, and we'll see what happens. It's to me, the question isn't whether somebody like Biden wins New Hampshire. I don't think he will. The question is, how far back does he finish? And the same thing is true with Iowa. If he finishes far back, then it may turn into a two-way race between Biden and Bernie. And if it turns out Biden does better in those two states, then it may not be a two-man race.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Yes, well, it'll be damn exciting. I will be able to go almost directly from like impeachment to Iowa. That's fun. There's not much lag in between.
Amy Klobuchar and the others don't think it's so much fun. They got to go back and forth.
You know what? Do they really? I mean, they should just go. Everybody else is left.
Yeah, apparently.
That's
if
they go, they'll get in trouble.
Oh yes, hear ye, under penalty of imprisonment. Shut up.
Yeah,
and
well, that
sit
they've
down.
done.
Well, they're not enforcing that, are they?
The shut up part is.
By the way, just for those of you who want to know, we don't resume till this afternoon.
Yeah, well, is it one? It's probably 1 p.m.
I think
every day.
1-ish, something like that. I think that it's 1-ish Senate time, as Claire McCaskill said. If they say 1, they mean 1:30.
Yeah, they've been pretty good.
Reasonably, within a half hour.
Really? Were they even late yesterday? I didn't watch. I've been having trouble.
Well,
watching.
every time, McConnell, we're going to take a half-hour break for dinner.
Well,
that means 45 minutes.
These guys are senators. I mean,
Yeah.
Takes them longer.
And famously prickly.
Fast. Yeah. Oh, Lee. Yes. Prickly. Yeah, got it,
yes,
right.
That's what I said. Even John Roberts would approve of that.
Yes, right. You're not talking about Senator Lee, are you?
I am.
Okay.
So one last thing I'll mention, just because I thought it was so
bad.
interesting. Patrick Egan, who teaches political science at NYU, has a graphic up today. Vote for Republican presidential candidates by race and education, 1980 through 2016. Looking at the overall population and who voted for Republicans.
All right.
And what he's showing is that when you look at whites versus non-whites,
Yes. Whites versus non-whites.
college education is an enormously big deal among whites. Non-Hispanic whites with no college, 62% voted for the Republican, 41% of college whites. But with voters of color, college 20, no college 17. So whether or not you go to college as a stand-in for class makes no difference. Although it used to. Back in the 80s and 90s, there was a difference among voters of color, and there was no difference among whites. And now there's a huge difference among whites, but no difference among voters of color. So that's really been a big shift.
That is interesting.
And again, that's one of the reasons why people concentrate on non-college whites. They're a different group than everybody else.
Yes. Well, okay. I mean, that it is what it is. It's interesting. I'd love to have somebody's guess about why that's not such a big deal in communities of color. I have some.
It was a big deal until, I would argue
who cares
something
about
big
my
happened in
ideas?
2001, and all of a sudden everybody started going off to war. A lot of things happened, and both in whites and non-whites, the difference between college and non-college narrowed. And then what happened is that it stayed narrow with voters of color, but it starting in 2008, when the black guy got elected, suddenly there was an enormous shift in whites.
Yeah,
That's
one
my
thing.
explanation, because
Sure.
the tipping point's there. The gap started in 2008 with whites. That's when it started to widen. And the gap started to narrow in 2000, 2001, between 2000 and 2004 with blacks or people or voters of color, not specifically blacks alone.
Yeah. Well, that's a very interesting question, and I'm sure it would just get, be hazarding.
When war comes, in other words, people of color are forced to be pragmatic.
That is really true. I guess I was also thinking along in terms of like, at some point, communities of color began to be able to demonstrate to the rest of us what they probably knew all along, which was that the idea that if you go and get an education, you can absolutely better yourself in all possible ways because we're an egalitarian society wasn't exactly true. But I think that would probably be a smaller portion of it than, you all have to go to war now. Even if you have graduated from college, just to pay off the college loans, you have to go to war. That's a very interesting dynamic that somebody else probably
explained.
Has
it's not like my explanation is better than anybody else's, but it's striking. And what's really striking is how in 2008, going forward, all of a sudden, non-college whites decided that they're voting super Republican. And college whites decided.
I don't even remember taking the "Don't Be a Racist" class in college.
Yeah,
but it must have happened.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you go to the Marxist education camps, right?
Yes,
you come out thinking weird things.
The Marxist education camps that cost $50,000 a year. That's
something like that. Anyway, that's why college versus no college, your point, is why it's often used as a surrogate for class differences.
Yeah. Well, that's good reasoning. What if we make college free? Will that work anymore?
I don't know.
That's it. All right. I am against free college because it'll screw up the polling.
Well, that alone is a good reason to oppose it, right? Because
I think so.
As good as any.
What non-college whites? It was free. What are you talking about? How are you non-college at this point?
So anyway, that's a summary for today.
Right.
Very good presentation by the Democrats, getting lots of praise for that. And, people are watching. I mean, the biggest network share of people watching yesterday was Fox. But somebody made an interesting observation. There's a big difference between how Fox covered the daytime impeachment stuff versus the nighttime impeachment stuff. During the day, they had a feed of the Democrats doing their presentation. So Fox News watchers during the day had solid Democratic, here are the facts presentations. Now, they would play with the chyrons. They would literally do things like hysterical point made by Democrats as one of their chyrons.
Wow.
But so you got a different message if you turned off the sound and just looked at the chyrons. But if you listened to what the Democrats were saying, you actually heard the Democrats make a case that you probably were unfamiliar with.
Yeah. So they probably
which is quite interesting, and that's one of the reasons why McConnell didn't really want this, but he got it anyway. However, at night, you didn't get uninterrupted feed of the Democrats speaking. You got Laura Ingraham and Tucker Carlson with the Democrats speaking in the background, but basically them doing their usual shows.
Yeah.
So if the voter viewership was high in the evening, you didn't get the same kind of news feed that you got if you watch Fox during the day. And then the final point about that is, whereas Fox had the larger share of any network, the other networks combined were a larger share than Fox. So Americans were getting this news. And according to the polls, maybe a third are watching and another third are watching intermittently, and then another 15 to 18% will get their news later but still go back to it. This stuff filters down. It takes time. But big events like this actually do have an impact. Again, You're not expecting huge shifts and all of a sudden, now I understand, let's impeach him. Well, he's already impeached. Let's remove him.
That.
What you're doing is you're setting the predicate for, look, this guy's a crook. How could you vote for him again? And what he did really mattered. And yes, he did it. And that's all filtering through. And the polls are saying even now, just immediately during and after, people accept and understand the idea that, yeah, he did it. Again, the argument is what to do about it. But, that's a case that needs to be made still. And that's the next couple of days of the Democratic presentation. So that's my summary for today. It gives you 10 minutes to make stuff up and take you through 10 o'clock. And then you got another hour. Sorry.
I think I should just keep going. No breaks today.
No breaks. It was a good no-break show. That was kind of fun.
Yeah. Well, that was interesting.
But I missed the music. I like the music.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can play music for you. You want to hear some music?
I guess I shouldn't have said anything, but, the clock was looking. I get the train to look at the clock and see.
Reporting news. It was happening.
When is David going to interrupt me? Oh.
Right. No music coming.
You missed your opportunity. Too bad, buddy.
You were so compelling that I forgot the alarms. Usually I try and set them before we begin because that happens as they're talking to you and then, who wants to be fiddling with the clock.
This from the guy who forgot to pick up the phone when I call.
Right. I see everything is going wrong. I'm not even sure we're on. I may not have pressed the button. I'm just kidding about that.
I'll ask Mike. He'll be able to tell us what's really going on.
Yeah, that's it. And I was not a guest on the podcast because it didn't happen.
It did not happen. All right. Thanks so much. This was fun. And I will wind up coming back, I guess, on Monday.
Yeah, I think so. And by that time, the Republicans will be presenting their – it may be done. They may finish up on Saturday or they might decide to –
They may have 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And say, look, this didn't happen and we're not here. I rest my case.
I would, yeah. Well, maybe. I'll be interested to see, too, whether they argue some of the arguments that they briefed on. I mean, you would think so. Normally, that's what
I don't even know that they briefed on.
Well,
they look like they really didn't do their homework.
They did something. They filled 160 pages, and it's interesting to see. And one of the things we haven't talked about, but I'll give you something to think about over the weekend, is they actually included an argument that this impeachment, that the whole impeachment is invalid, that all of the evidence that the House gathered that now they'll be allowed to introduce and make part of the Senate record should actually be excluded as invalid because the subpoenas issued by the House they were issued before the House had a formal impeachment.
Right. Nancy Pelosi had a press conference and didn't vote on opening an impeachment inquiry. Therefore, even though the Constitution says it's the sole prerogative of the House, meaning they can decide how they want to do this, according to them, it's not really official, so none of this really happened.
Yes.
So maybe Mike Braun is right.
And they do well. That's what he was talking about. This didn't happen, but I mean, this impeachment trial didn't happen. They expanded on the point in their brief, and I would love to see whether or not they're going to argue this one, because honestly, I think that maybe the Democrats could spend part of day 2 or 3 on it. They broadened that argument into, and therefore, even if 67 senators are convinced to vote to convict, we wouldn't recognize this impeachment as valid, and the president would not have been impeached and removed from office, and he'd stay in the White House regardless.
All I know is that on some points they've even lost Jonathan Turley.
Oh, my. Well, that really is something.
So, good job, guys. All right, I am not a lawyer. I don't play one on the internets, but I do try to follow this sort of stuff, and I'm fascinated by process questions and problems. And so that's why I turn to experts like David Waldman, Kagro in the morning, to help sort us through this when Congress is doing it. Joan McCarter and other experts that David has on the show. It really is interesting stuff, and you don't realize how important it is until it shows up and says, oh, how can they do that?
Right. Well, I'll tell you how.
Oh, I'll tell you how. Exactly. And so for those of you who are regular listeners, you appreciate the wealth of information David brings here. And that's why I don't let him talk.
Okay. Yeah, right. Why
At least during my segments. Anyway.
Excellent. It's a lot easier this way.
Anyway, take care, and I'll talk to you on Monday.
All right. Very good. We'll talk to you then. In fact, let's not take a break between now and Monday. Let's just continue going on. And if we broadcast, we broadcast. It's just a phone call. It's a perfect phone call between the two of us. And we can just leave it at that. Yeah, it's true. I guess we can expand on that a little bit and go back into pocket just before the break. This is something that I've been agonizing over because it's been, like I said, it's been in pocket, and we haven't had a chance to discuss it because of so many other more basic issues. But I did mention the other day to Armando that there is this argument in the brief supported, allegedly, by a 37-page OLC memo that makes the argument not only would they insist that because the House didn't hold a formal vote on impeachment before they began issuing their subpoenas, the information revealed by the witnesses deposed under these, what they would say, invalid subpoenas, is inadmissible, but and so they wouldn't recognize a 67 vote to convict and remove the president. They also offered up another explanation as to why they would refuse to recognize it, which is that they feel that the articles of impeachment are insufficiently clear in presenting choices to the Senate to vote on. And they view the articles of impeachment as compound charges of some sort. And that, for instance, they lay out you've heard the charges read, that the president did one, in contacting the Ukrainian president and soliciting his assistance in a personal political matter, break this law, and then withholding the money was blackmailing him, and also breaking the Federal Impoundment Control Act, and et cetera, et cetera. But the claim was, well, you'll only vote on this one article, well, two articles of impeachment, but you'll vote on the compound article. What if, they say, I don't know, let's say 18 to 20 senators thought that he did break the Impoundment Control Act, and but the rest of them didn't. And maybe 15 senators thought that he abused power by trying to leverage the Ukrainians, but the rest of them didn't. And they end up getting 67 votes to convict on, let's say, in this case, Article 1, but they all voted for it for different reasons. Some number of them voted because they believed Part 1 of the article, but not Parts 2, 3, and 4. Some others voted for it because they believed Part 2, but not Parts 1, 3, and 4, etc., etc. And therefore, you can't be sure that you got 67 votes on any one part of all the articles. That was a real stretch. But that's in there. They actually briefed that as a legal and legitimate, in their view, reason not to respect the conviction should it come to pass in the Senate. And I mean, I guess as long as if you're gonna spend day 2 and or 3 outlining the dangers of what's in store for you if you let Donald Trump continue in office after doing all of this, then I would think that would need to be part of the warning too. These guys briefed it. This is their intention to come here and tell you that's going to be okay. Will you ratify it? Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. After taking our first break, which was usually our second break, but we didn't take the first break. You get the idea. We can rejoin this part of the conversation. I'm looking around here. I thought I had set aside, I'm pretty sure I did, but now having trouble finding the tweet that alerted me to this thing, and I think maybe I can dig it up using the language that I recall being a part of it. Where is this thing? I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was here, but is this it? Maybe this is it. Let's see. Is this it? Was it a Kyle Cheney? Yeah, here we go. Okay, so between these two tweets, one I mentioned the other day and just began with again was the Andy Grewal, Grewal. I don't know about the pronunciation here. A professor at the University of Iowa was the one whose note I saw about this OLC memo. So the White House brief has a 37-page OLC memo dated yesterday. That would have been January 19th. In its appendix, it concludes that subpoenas issued prior to October 31st, 2019 are invalid because there was not a formal impeachment inquiry vote. And it's a controversial point, to say the least. In my view, and in the view of, so far, the judicial branch as well, the House gets to, having the sole power of impeachment means also, I think, having the sole power to define what impeachment is and isn't, and when they're impeaching and when they're not. But it was a desperate read that they were clinging to, the idea that if they didn't have a formal impeachment inquiry, their argument isn't thoroughly terrible, I guess. We'll say that. The argument being, well, look, it's the House that has the prerogative to impeach, so the House ought to act in some way to indicate that they're impeaching, not simply just say, well, we get to define it ourselves. Although, again, we're also falling back on the fact that the subpoena rules, you don't have to be in impeachment mode to issue a valid subpoena. We should say that at the outset. And it isn't the case that the House has to act to validate every subpoena issued. That used to be the case, actually, when the House was going to use its subpoena power. I guess originally, but it's a long time since they've had to do things that way, particularly for certain of the committees that do an awful lot of investigating and oversight as a matter of routine. But the rules on issuing those subpoenas were loosened even further under Republicans recently, basically in pursuit of their crazy Benghazi mania, and they needed for the Oversight Committee, the Government Oversight Committee, and for the Judiciary Committee, and for others to be able to issue their subpoenas without bothering the rest of the House with them, because otherwise they'd be voting on subpoenas all the time. So Republican House rules liberalized their ability of certain committees to issue their own subpoenas without having to come to the House for any sort of ratification, and even liberalized the ability of the chair of some of these more important investigatory committees to issue the subpoenas more or less on their own. Sometimes with the co-signature of the ranking member from the minority, sometimes all by themselves, as I recall. But this was a point of contention as soon as Democrats began to use the same rule to handle their post-Mueller, or actually, post-election, in some cases pre-Mueller, and then concurrent with Mueller, post-Mueller, and then into the impeachment side of things, began, using the rules that had been left behind by Republicans who now, decried these rules as extraordinarily unfair. Let's see. What I have here in Andy's first tweet is screenshots of the cover letter that goes with the memorandum. Let's see if I guess he included it because it summarized the argument in whatever terms they were able to come up with. Let's see. From the OLC, January 19th, memorandum for Pat A. Cipollone, counsel to the president. By the way, I am hearing multiple pronunciations still in the impeachment trial of Cipollone/Cipolloni's pronunciation. But here's what it says. The House Committee's authority to investigate for impeachment. On September 24, 2019, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi said at a press conference that the House of Representatives is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry into the president's actions, and that she was directing 6 committees to proceed with several previously pending investigations under that umbrella of impeachment inquiry. Need to interrupt here for just a second and check in. Got some notes coming in from Greg. Some additional story direction, but also letting me know that I think we're settling on Cipollone as the proper pronunciation. See, Robert should have sent Alito. He probably would have got that correct. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. All right. You're right. Oh, and he actually said interesting. All right, sending me a separate story. But let me bounce back to the memorandum for Mr. Cipollone. Like baloney. Rhymes with baloney is what you can say. Cipollone. Yeah. Okay. Right. So they're complaining about the timing here. On September 24th, Pelosi announced at a press conference, we're moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. That's not enough for them. Shortly thereafter, the House Committee on Foreign Affairs issued a subpoena directing the Secretary of State to produce a series of documents related to the recent conduct of diplomacy between the United States and Ukraine. And they refer here to the subpoena of September 27th. I mean, you know how legal memos work? I don't know, if you've never had the misfortune to have to read a legal memo, you got to have citations, for everything. This is like the bloggers have to have links to everything. Look at what they just said. This is how to waste time and paper as a lawyer, but it's necessary. They just said, shortly thereafter, after September 24th, the House Committee on Foreign Affairs issued a subpoena directing the Secretary of State to produce a series of documents related to the recent conduct of diplomacy between the United States and Ukraine. You know what that means, right? But in case you don't believe it, it says here, see subpoena of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, September 27th, 2019. In other words, they're saying, if you don't believe that the Committee on Foreign Affairs issued the subpoena on September 27th, 2019, well, have I got news for you. You should see the subpoena issued by the Committee on Foreign Affairs on September 27th, 2019, by way of reference. But on the other hand, I just wanted to pause and remind you, this is the importance that legal folks place on seeing the documents. And it's not misplaced. You hear me all the time saying when the president says, well, blah, 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 something happened or whatever, or I have hereby ordered something. Oh yeah, let me see the paper. Well, here at least the Office of Legal Counsel is saying, well, that's the way you should do things. You should see the paper. Don't just take my word for it that the House Committee on Foreign Affairs issued a subpoena on September 27th. Take a look at the subpoena from September 27th for yourself and prove it. And if that's important to you, then you understand the importance of documents, and that's why the Senate ought not to continue ducking their responsibility by asking for the documents we're talking about here. Even in your own OLC memo and your own trial brief, you insist on the importance of documents. But that will convince nobody because they're not thinking. They're just voting however they're supposed to vote in order to win. All right. The memo goes on. In an accompanying letter, 3 committee chairmen stated that their committees jointly sought these documents, not in connection with legislative oversight, but pursuant to the House of Representatives' impeachment inquiry. In the following days, the committees issued subpoenas to the acting White House Chief of Staff. Of course, it would be the acting White House Chief of Staff, right? I mean, he's still acting in all this, which is amazing. Okay, so in the following days, the committees issued subpoenas to Mulvaney, right? The acting Chief of Staff, the Secretary of Defense, who was real at that point, the Secretary of Energy, and several others within the executive branch. For the reasons set forth above, this jumps down to part 5 of the letter, or the memo. So it leaves out all the yada yada. But their conclusion, for the reasons set forth above, we conclude that the House must expressly authorize the committee to conduct an impeachment investigation and to use compulsory process in that investigation before the committee may compel the production of documents or testimony in support of the House's sole power of impeachment. And for that, they refer you to the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5. The House had not authorized such an investigation in connection with the impeachment-related subpoenas issued before October 31st, 2019, and the subpoenas therefore had no compulsory effect. The House's adoption of Resolution 660 did not alter the legal status of those subpoenas because the resolution did not ratify them or otherwise address their terms. Please let us know if we may be of further assistance. Stephen A. Engel, Assistant Attorney General. And I'll say this, we can make sense of their argument. It might not necessarily be entirely horrible. You see what they're saying here? September 24th, she said, we're moving ahead with impeachment. Sometime after September 24th, but before October 31st, a couple of committees, and this is an interesting point, a couple of committees issue subpoenas, which I would say, first I would remind you, yes, a subpoena is legal and binding from the Congress, even outside of the context of impeachment. But what they're arguing is that Pelosi said, well, it's not so much what Pelosi said, but what the chairs of the committees say. They're saying that they said this. Of course, I don't have the document in front of me, so I can't tell you whether or not it really says this. But that in an accompanying letter, and I'm sure in some other page of the document they include reference to that letter. But I don't see it here. But that's Kyle Cheney's problem, not theirs. In an accompanying letter, 3 committee chairmen stated that their committees jointly sought these documents, which would ordinarily be okay. But this is where it becomes complicated. Not in connection with legislative oversight, which, if it was in connection with legislative oversight, would be, they would be hard-pressed to come up with a reason why the subpoenas were invalid. Subpoenas can be validly issued for the purpose of legislative oversight. But the letter said they were pursuant to the House of Representatives impeachment inquiry. So, if, as the OLC pretends at this point anyway to believe, if it's their belief that Pelosi's announcement isn't enough to put them in impeachment mode and that there has to be some sort of House-wide ratification first, then asserting subpoena power pursuant to an unannounced impeachment inquiry and expressly not in connection with legislative oversight leaves you without basis for issuing the subpoena. You could be doing it validly in support of an impeachment inquiry if the House first votes to put the committees on that footing, or you could do it without a formal vote of about an impeachment inquiry, but in pursuit of legislative oversight functions. But you can't have no vote of the House and disclaim legislative oversight purpose, but cling to impeachment purpose. That's an interesting question. And it comes down to what power does the House have to define whether or not it's in impeachment mode? Does it have the sole power? Is having the sole power enough such that it should be beyond the reach of Article 3 courts to pass on whether or not the House is doing that? Or is some minimal requirement of a demonstration of the will of the House required first? So Andy's next tweet in the series says, of course, the memo, and he has another screen grab here, relies, and it says here, obligatory citation to Judge Rao's dissent in Mazars, I guess outlining this position. But as a minority dissent in a case in which they lost. They took this to the D.C. Circuit and lost it. I mean, what I'm saying is that theory has been tested at a trial court and then appealed and lost. So, that's kind of an important part of figuring out how much validity the OLC's memo really has here. We're entering into a weird phase with this OLC, and I think they're doing their damnedest to dismantle the importance and deference that OLC normally gets. And I think that's a strategic thing in their mind. They want it to be viewed as a whatever the president wants memo factory. It works in their advantage in the long run. All right, so here's their argument. At some point, it picks up this way in the memo. In so doing, I guess, with the House putting themselves in this position, the House has recognized the fundamental difference between the legislative oversight investigation and an impeachment investigation by saying so in their letter, I guess. Now, a highlighted portion, I guess Andy has highlighted this. The House does more than simply pick a label when it debates and decides when it wishes to shift from legislating to impeaching, and to authorize a committee to take responsibility for the grave and weighty process of impeachment. This is the argument, again, in the dissent in Trump versus Mazars USA, LLP. That is Trump suing to block his accountancy firm, right, from, I forget what they were being asked for. What was it? They were asked for this isn't the tax case, the tax returns, I don't think, was it? I don't remember. Mazars. Now, would that even, because no impeachment related inquiry was made into the taxes, was it? Can't recall. All right. Well, anyway, that's they're citing as precedent here the dissent, which it isn't. I mean, it's not precedent. So anyway, that was again from Judge Rao, recognizing that, quote, the Constitution forces the House to take accountability for its actions when investigating the president's misconduct. Because a legislative investigation seeks information respecting conditions which the legislation is intended to affect or change, legislative judgments normally depend more on the predicted consequences of proposed legislative actions and their political acceptability than on precise reconstruction of past events. I guess that goes to defining the difference between legislative oversight hearings and investigatory impeachment-focused hearings. Citing a couple of interesting past cases, McGrain versus Doherty of 1927, and then one of the Nixon cases from 74. By contrast, an impeachment inquiry, they argue, must evaluate whether a civil officer did or did not commit treason, bribery, or another high crime or misdemeanor. And it is more likely than a legislative oversight investigation to call for the reconstruction of past events. I don't think that's necessarily true at all, especially if you are legislating with respect to preventing the repeat occurrence of something, I don't know, whatever it is that's raised your ire, raised hackles as a legislator. That's a very dubious statement. I don't even know if you could really even get, even just saying that it's more likely than a legislative oversight investigation to call for a reconstruction of past events. No, I doubt, not an evidence-based. Maybe it's more likely than a Republican call for legislative oversight because they love to investigate things that didn't happen or love to address problems that don't exist in their legislation. It doesn't usually happen, though. So, but I don't think that damages their claim because if they're right about what the letter from the committee chairs said, the committee chairs, in their view, disclaimed any legislative purpose, and so it really wouldn't matter what the difference is. They've said that it's not that. Andy's tweet thread continues here. OLC emphasizes that prior impeachment subpoenas were predicated on formal votes. I have not yet read the main text of the brief, but I assume that this OLC memo is intended to provide a defense to some of the obstruction of Congress charges. This portion of the memo says, upon the issuance of these subpoenas, you asked whether these committees could compel the production of documents and testimony in furtherance of an asserted impeachment inquiry. you being Cipollone. We advised that the committees lacked such authority because at the time the subpoenas were issued, the House had not adopted any resolution authorizing the committees to conduct an impeachment inquiry. The Constitution vests the sole power of impeachment in the House of Representatives. For precisely that reason, the House itself must authorize an impeachment inquiry, as it has done in virtually every prior impeachment investigation in our nation's history, including every one involving a president. A congressional committee's right to exact testimony and to call for the production of documents is limited by the controlling charter the committee has received from the House. Yet the House, by its rules, has authorized its committees to issue subpoenas only for matters within their legislative jurisdiction. Accordingly, no committee may undertake the momentous move from legislative oversight to impeachment without a delegation by the full House of such authority. It's an interesting approach. We are not, they say, the first to reach this conclusion. This was the position of the House in the impeachments of President Nixon and Clinton. Well, I'm not so sure. In the case of President Nixon, following a preliminary inquiry, the House adopted a formal resolution as a necessary step to confer the investigative powers of the House to their full extent upon the Judiciary Committee. As the House parliamentarian explained, it had been considered necessary for the House to specifically vest the Committee on the Judiciary with the investigatory and subpoena power to conduct the impeachment investigations. Here the problem is, of course, that the argument was that the rules have changed since the Nixon days and even since the Clinton days, and that they had been changed by the Republicans. But that's not addressed here so far. The House followed the same course in the impeachment of President Clinton, which, as I said, still different set of rules. After reviewing the independent counsel's referral, the Judiciary Committee decided that it must receive authorization from the full House before proceeding on any further course of action. The House again adopted a resolution authorizing the committee to issue compulsory process in support of an impeachment investigation. As Representative John Conyers summarized in 2016, according to parliamentarians of the House, past and present, the impeachment process does not begin until the House actually votes to authorize the committee to investigate the charges. Let's see. Moving on from there, is there another piece of this? Yeah, we got to go back to his tweet thread. OLC concludes that the October 31st vote did not cleanse or ratify the previously issued House subpoenas, writing, "We next address whether the House ratified any of the previous committee subpoenas when it adopted Resolution 660 on October 31st, after weeks of objections from the executive branch and many members of Congress to the committee's efforts to conduct an unauthorized impeachment inquiry. Resolution 660 provides that 6 committees of the House are directed to continue their ongoing investigations as part of the existing House of Representatives inquiry into whether sufficient grounds exist for the House of Representatives to exercise its constitutional power to impeach Donald John Trump, President of the United States of America. The resolution further prescribes certain procedures by which HPSCI, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Judiciary Committee may conduct hearings in connection with the investigation defined by that resolution. Resolution 660 does not speak at all to the committee's past actions or seek to ratify any subpoena previously issued by the House committees. That, again, pointed out by Judge Rao in the dissent in Trump v. Mazars. The resolution directs HPSCI and the other committees to continue their investigations, and the Rules Committee apparently assumed, incorrectly in our view, and that's just their view, that earlier subpoenas were legally valid. All subpoenas to the executive branch remain in full force, according to the House committee report on that one. But the resolution's operative language does not address any previously issued subpoenas or provide the imprimatur of the House to give those subpoenas legal force. And the House knows how to ratify existing subpoenas when it chooses to do so. On July 24, 2019, the House adopted a resolution that expressly ratified and affirmed all current, and I'm not even sure if we continue in this one or not, all current, does they cut off? All right, well, I guess the point is that they're saying that in the past, they have successfully retroactively authorized subpoenas and they chose not to do it. And then Andy finally comes around and says to this, there it is. And he calls out a piece of this highlighted part. Finally, we address some of the consequences that followed from our conclusion that the committee's pre-October 31st impeachment-related subpoenas were unauthorized. First, because the subpoenas exceeded the committee's investigative authority and lacked compulsory effect. The committees were mistaken in contending that the recipient's failure or refusal to comply with this subpoena would constitute evidence of obstruction of the House's impeachment inquiry. That's the three chairmen's letter they're citing there. As explained at length above, when the subpoenas were issued, there was no valid impeachment inquiry. To the extent that the committee's subpoenas sought information in support of an unauthorized impeachment inquiry, the failure to comply with those subpoenas was no more punishable than were the failures of the witnesses in Watkins, Rumley, Kilbourne, and Lamont, cases cited earlier in this brief, I guess, to answer questions that were beyond the scope of those committees' authorized jurisdiction. See Watkins, holding that the conviction for contempt of Congress was invalid because when the witness failed to answer questions, the House had not used sufficient care in authorizing the use of compulsory process, and the committee had not shown that the information was pertinent to a subject within their jurisdiction. So, when he says there it is, what he means is there is the basis on which you can expect the president's team, beginning Saturday, to make the case that the charge of obstruction of Congress is largely or completely invalid and can't be held against the president, and no conviction should obtain. There's a little bit more here. Actually, there's quite a bit more here, but our break is coming up. Let's see what else we can squeeze in. The DOJ says here in this excerpt, the House cannot plausibly claim that any executive branch official engaged in obstruction by failing to comply with committee subpoenas or directing subordinates not to comply. And in the next grab here, the key section in his view, absent any effort by the House committees to accommodate the executive branch's legitimate concerns with the unprecedented nature of the committee's actions, it was reasonable for executive branch officials to decline to comply with the subpoenas addressed to them. And that's pretty interesting. He concludes by saying, I have no idea who is right on the impeachment vote history, by the way. I'm just enjoying the theater. Well, it's not my favorite view of things necessarily, but it's a very interesting one and brings up a key point that I guess you can expect to be argued perhaps before Saturday when the defense begins. It might be something that the House managers are ready to address earlier than that. And of course, one way of addressing it would be to say, yeah, we went to court about this and you lost. Now, you can appeal that loss, but you haven't done it yet, because right now the controlling law in this circuit is we're right and you're wrong, whether you're OLC or not. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see if we can't continue on in this line of inquiry. I'm trying to decide whether it requires the reading of the Politico article with which Kyle Cheney begins his inquiry into the substance of the president's brief. And I'm not sure. Let's see. I mean, maybe we'll read his comments and then get to the really interesting part when he gets the brief in hand. He starts off this chain of comments on the 20th by saying, and linking to this Politico piece here, and I'll give you the tweet and the piece so you can read it through. But I don't think at this point the piece gives us anything new. But at that point, it did. New, he said, the president filed his first legal rebuttal to the House's impeachment case largely sidestepping the evidence presented by the House and offering constitutionally dubious arguments for rejecting the case outright. The White House team leans heavily into the fact that the Democrats didn't charge Trump with a statutory crime. That is a very dubious argument, of course, even though it's been widely agreed based on the framers and past practice that no such violation is necessary for impeachment. And then he gets a hold of the brief, and which he says clocks in at 171 pages, and links to it. The next tweet says, just 2 mentions of Giuliani in the White House brief compared to 91 in the House's brief. I don't know if that tells us anything in particular, but it was something that he noted. And but the next tweet is where I picked up on things and started looking into it. Here's where things get really wild, he said. The president's team argues that a conviction would be unconstitutional because of the way the House's articles are written. This is a different argument than what the OLC memo we just read, though it may be that OLC is behind that one as well. But here's what's going on. So in addition, there's the OLC argument that the subpoenas were invalid, and that may mean 2 different things, by the way. It could mean that they say, first of all, that the evidence secured pursuant to those subpoenas is inadmissible. 2, it could mean that those officials who refused to abide by the subpoenas and refused their testimony, which is the basis of the obstruction of Congress charge, weren't really obstructing Congress because they didn't get valid subpoenas. You have to get a valid subpoena and disregard that in order to obstruct Congress. But, that's the charge with respect to failure to appear. I'm not certain that it's the case that you couldn't convince, you won't convince Republican senators of anything. But I'm not certain that in a court case, just to draw the analogy, that you couldn't build an obstruction case based on additional, based on a number of things, including the instruction not to comply, even with a valid subpoena, no matter what. And I'm sure that would be part of the argument as well. Anyway, back to what Kyle was pointing out here. Here's where things get really wild. The very separate argument that it would be unconstitutional to remove the president upon conviction because of the way the House's articles are written. And here there is a screen grab from the brief that explains it. I don't know exactly where it falls in here, but this is part B of something. But that doesn't matter. The header of it, what you're looking for if you have your brief in front of you, is the articles are unconstitutionally duplicitous. That's a lot of syllables. Here, each article is impermissibly duplicitous. Each article represents a smorgasbord of multiple independent acts as possible bases for conviction. And this is wrong because they have double spaced after periods. So you can just throw this brief out. Under the umbrella charge of abuse of power, Article 1 offers senators a menu of at least 4 different bases for conviction. 1, corruptly requesting that Ukraine announce an investigation into the Biden-Burisma affair. 2, corruptly requesting that Ukraine announce an investigation into alleged Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. 3, corruptly conditioning the release of Ukraine's security assistance on these investigations, and 4, corruptly conditioning a White House meeting on these investigations. Article 2 similarly invites senators to pick and choose among at least 10 different bases for obstruction, including, and let's see if any of these evade the contention of the OLC. 1, directing the White House and agencies without lawful cause or excuse not to produce documents in response to a congressional subpoena. Or 2, directing one or more of 9 different individuals without lawful cause or excuse not to testify in response to a congressional subpoena. As a result, the articles invite the danger of an unconstitutional conviction if less than 2/3 of senators agree that any particular act was an abuse of power or obstruction, with at least 4 independent bases alleged for abuse of power. Article 1 invites conviction if as few as 18 senators agree that any one alleged act occurred and constituted an abuse of power. The deficiency in the articles cannot be remedied by dividing the articles because that is prohibited by the rules. The only constitutional option, therefore, I guess they mean, is to reject the articles and acquit the president. That's a big leap. And I don't think it has ever mattered in any context in dealing with the Congress or for the courts viewing what congressional action has meant in any other context, any context at all, impeachment or otherwise, legislative, etc., what the motivation was. It has never mattered, and it wouldn't matter in any context that I could think of. If you passed a law, duly enacted law, that has no constitutional defect, but some, let's say for the sake of argument, bans lawn darts. And I know that's a sore point for a lot of you. And I don't know if there's a federal ban on lawn darts. I don't know how it was imposed. But let's say that they did it and then assume for the sake of argument that there's no constitutional problem with banning lawn darts. Their argument is essentially this, that it would, of course, in this case, require a bare majority, a simple majority of those present and voting. But let's assume a full Senate, and so therefore 51 senators were to vote in favor of the ban on lawn darts. But if, I don't know, doesn't even matter. If 10 of them thought, if 41 of them thought, I'm voting to ban lawn darts because they're dangerous and they can come down out of the sky and hit kids in the head and kill them, which is why they banned lawn darts. But 10 are Mike Braun, and they are like, well, that never happened, but I'm in favor of banning lawn darts because I think it dishonors America's lawns to stab them repeatedly with lawn darts. No kids were ever killed. I deny that ever happened. But the beneficial nematodes beneath the surface of America's finest lawns are in danger. I don't think that they would really be worried about that, but let's say that they were. And they're not Mike Braun's. They're not Republicans at all. They are sensitive environmental type Democrats who are concerned that individual blades of grass are being killed. This was a sort of argument that would appeal to Rush Limbaugh or something like that. It wouldn't matter, basically. The courts would never in a million years. They've been asked to do this, but they would, and they never have, and they've explicitly rejected the idea that it matters what the motivation of the senators were. The motivation doesn't matter. It's the vote that matters. How many people voted for making this the law? 51. How many of them agreed on the reason it should be law? Who gives a crap? That is what the answer of the courts has been. So you got a pretty big problem with that one, quite honestly. But, go for it. What the hell, right? They got to see what sticks. So they'll throw that out. We'll see whether they make that argument or not at any part in their 3 days, or whether Democrats even, I don't know, whether you would spend time countering that ahead of time. Well, Kyle's thread continues. Let's see if there's anything else of interest in it. This raises the prospect that even if 2/3 of the Senate votes to convict Trump, he simply wouldn't accept the vote and seek to fight it. And that's where the problem really lies. They're wrong, but what if they insist on acting as if they believed they were right? What would be the remedy? What would you do? I mean, you'd have to fight that out at some point. You'd have to have somebody say, no. That's just crazy. I listened to Kagro in the morning. He's right. He described the situation correctly. Courts don't do that. So, yeah, you're impeached. You're removed. You're gone. I mean, do they even accept his pleadings if they're styled as having been filed on behalf of the President of the United States? I don't know. It's just an interesting, now there's some real interesting political theory for you. Who's, that's a great way to fix it. I just realized what's going on here is they use their favorite excuse, right? 67 senators vote to convict the president and say you're impeached, you're removed from office, you're disqualified from further federal office, You're no longer the president. That's that. And the president says, no, didn't you read my brief? The fact is, we don't know whether 67 of you agreed on any one particular facet of either of the two articles. So no, I'm not removed from office, and I am still the president. And I'm suing. And here's my brief. And of course it's styled as it being filed on behalf of Donald J. Trump, President of the United States, because I'm still President of the United States. At that point, wouldn't it be fun to see the court say, I'm sorry, you're not the President of the United States, and you therefore have no standing to bring this suit. That is the answer that we're really looking for here. That is probably the only answer at this point that would fully satisfy Armando, although he might also ask that they actually hit Donald Trump over the head with a gavel. But, we don't want to pin that one on him because that could get him in trouble with the legal authorities. It's an assault, and I'm sure he wouldn't endorse that, although he might wink and look the other way. Let's see. I think that's the end of the substantive comments from Kyle Cheney on that. But just to bring you up on the real serious, up to date on the most serious esoterica. It's seriously esoteric. It's not very serious as a legal argument. That's been brought up in the president's brief. That's the only thing I can offer you by way of preview of what's coming next from the president when it becomes their turn to present their case. I don't know if they're going to spend any time on this. I don't know if they're embarrassed by this. I don't know if their plan is just to put that forward and let it sit there and not embarrass themselves on TV talking about it, such that individual Republican senators can lean on one or another or both parts of those stupid arguments in justification of their vote, and let them be the ones embarrassed on TV defending that position, or whether they really believe in them. I don't know, and that's what we'll find out, I guess, beginning as soon as Saturday and stretching out as long as next Tuesday, depending on how much time they want to put into that. So there you go. That is pretty interesting. I guess other small bits and pieces that also might require some attention. I think we'll reserve Friday for the long read stuff. But this has been waiting in the wings as well. I noted the tweet from Ryan Goodman, who's co-editor-in-chief of Just Security. That's how we usually hear his name announced. By the way, chaired professor at NYU Law. Just thought we'd put that out there. Former chaired professor at Harvard Law. Guess he wanted to move from Boston to New York badly enough to swap Harvard Law for NYU Law. Not a bad swap, right? Unless you're some sort of elitist. But you're still an East Coast elitist. You're that sort of elitist. Anyway, Ryan has this to say. When did he say it? January 20th, when all the documents were being filed. The White House memo relies 4 times, he notes, on the Sondland call where Trump said, I want no quid pro quo. We have seen on day one, during the arguments over the rules and the amendments offered by Chuck Schumer, lots of reference to that from the president's team, that the president kept saying, I want no quid pro quo, according to this call with Sondland. And Ryan just pointing out for us once again, the Mike Braun defense. That call did not happen, except in this case he's right, whereas Mike Braun is not. Right? The White House memo relies 4 times on Sondland call where Trump said, I want no quid pro quo. But that call didn't happen. That's problematic in the real world. And the call that Sondland referred to proves the very opposite. And he offers up this piece from Susan Simpson, The View from LL2, which I guess she published at Just Security, discussing that issue. Now, how long would it take to tell you that that call didn't exist and it didn't happen? And the answer is the rest of the show, as I'm scrolling through this. But here's the basic gist of it anyway. Headline, here's the proof that Trump's no quid pro quo call never happened. Wow. Seems like an awful lot. Maybe the first couple paragraphs will explain things, and then the nitty-gritty will give you the real stuff about what you're looking to prove here. At the heart of the impeachment inquiry, members of Congress may have been mistakenly led to believe that there were 2 phone calls between President Donald Trump and Ambassador Gordon Sondland in early September, with the second call having the possibility of helping the president's case. That's not what happened, Mike Braun. There was only 1 call, and it was highly incriminating. This is a piece she produced for us, by the way, for us, readers, on November 29th, 2019. And we may even have read part of it. The call occurred on September 7th. In this call, Trump did say there was, quote, no quid pro quo with Ukraine, but he then went on to outline his preconditions for releasing the security assistance and granting a White House visit, which was the quid pro quo. The call was so alarming that when John Bolton learned of it, he ordered his deputy, Tim Morrison, to immediately report it to the National Security Council lawyers. Sondland has testified there was a call on September 9th in which Trump said there was, quote, no quid pro quo, but that he wanted President Zelensky to do the right thing. A close reading of the publicly available evidence shows that the latter call, or alleged call anyway, was actually the very one that sent Morrison to the lawyers, and that Ambassador Bill Taylor foregrounded in his written deposition to inform Congress of the quid pro quo. As this article was in the publication process at Just Security, the Washington Post published a report raising doubts about the existence, the very existence, Mike Braun, of the September 9th call. Maybe we read that. Probably shorter. The analysis that follows is consistent with the Post's report and, among other points, shows why Sondland's no quid pro quo, I'm adopting the Alec Baldwin Trump voice on this one, why Sondland's no quid pro quo call is in fact the same as the September 7th call that Morrison reported to NSC lawyers on September 7th. Well, Simpson is nothing if not thorough. There's no way we're going to be able to get through this today. She references the Washington Post piece of November 27th. Witness testimony and records raise questions about account of Trump's no quid pro quo call. So basically, again, embellishment. It didn't happen. And that's problematic if the president's brief relies on it, insofar as people are bound by the truth of the evidence being offered in deciding how to vote. That not being the case, it's just something for us to get more frustrated about. So don't hurt yourself thinking about it, but tell your children what happened is about all I can tell you on this one. Let's see. Let me scroll a bit and see what other things we need to throw in there. Maybe some bits and pieces of other news that we can alert you to. Maybe it's something we'll get back to tomorrow, maybe not. Let's see. Highest on the list in terms of what's circulating this morning. Hey, it turns out that both Donald and Ivanka Trump were probably stealing from the inaugural funds. ProPublica has a report out which has gotten a lot of attention, and both there and elsewhere. Let's see. As a matter of fact, here we go. In the interest of time, I will credit ProPublica for their work, as always. But in the interest of time, we'll rely on the much more world-savvy writers at Daily Kos. That is, they know very well how short you are on time, and they very rarely eat it all up the way I do. That's why I'm here instead of there. Walter Einenkel with this piece. Did Donald and Ivanka Trump plunder inauguration funds? A suit filed by the D.C. Attorney General says yes. Unpopular President Donald Trump, as he begins, had one of the most poorly attended inaugurations in recent memory. Of course, while Trump's ego was subsequently stroked by his minions lying about the throngs of people who were supposedly excited to see him, the really important event attendees were wealthy and willing to pay for access to the newly elected white supremacist in chief. WNYC and ProPublica report that a new lawsuit claims that both Ivanka and Donald Trump were aware that their personal businesses were improperly making money by price gouging the Trump inaugural committee. And that's important. It's also, by the way, accompanied with news this morning that the Trump Miami Doral Resort, which is going to host an RNC function shortly, I think, also experienced wild price spikes in advance of it so that they could gouge and wash as much money from the RNC and into their pockets as possible. This was similarly charged recently in a somewhat less clearly sourced report that I think we shared a few weeks ago about an event at the Trump Hotel in Washington, similarly spiking prices in advance of a Trump event. And I'm still unsure exactly why it is. I guess it's... here's why he's not going to be convicted in the Senate. Apparently, his supporters love being fleeced by him. It gives them joy. It's funny. They think they're owning the libs by getting taken to the cleaners by Donald Trump, which is amazing. We're offended on their behalf, and so they therefore, to own the libs, they refuse to be offended on their own behalf. I love when Donald Trump steals money from me. It's what makes him such a brilliant, genius businessman. Anyway, the civil complaint filed on behalf of the District of Columbia by D.C. Attorney General Karl Racine details the objections of staffers at the inaugural committee. We're back on that. And this is the most serious one because the people who are supposed to be on Trump's side are the ones complaining here. And it harkens back to a story we heard a long, long time ago, and to accusations I've been making for a long, long time, too. Since November of 2016, I've been pretty sure that Donald Trump was stealing from his inauguration. Or again, remember, by the way, that he's the most poorly attended inauguration in recent memory. Walter says that right up front. I would add in there, most poorly attended inauguration in recent memory, and yet raised the most money by far, more than twice that raised by the most popular inauguration in recent memory. What did they do with all the money? And the answer is, what else would they do with the money? They steal it. That's what they're in it for. So, here's the deal. So, the D.C. Attorney General details the objections of staffers, that is, inauguration staffers, to exorbitant pricing for the use of Trump's Washington, D.C. hotel ballroom space. Specifically, event planner, remember her, Stephanie Winston Wolkoff's concerns. That's Melania's friend. Which were allegedly brought directly to then-President-elect Trump and his daughter. According to the document, Donald Trump said Ivanka would handle everything and make it right. That is, steal more. It's really rather remarkable what they did. And remarkable that Wolkoff even bothered to complain. Except remember, again, this is just another of the broken promises. Well, we're going to have all these magnificent things and it's going to be free for the whole country. Or we're going to save lots and lots of money because I already own the hotels. It could have been free to his inaugural committee, and they could have done, indoor holographic fireworks if they wanted to do it with the rest of the money, but they were busy stealing it, not putting on the best inauguration parties. Wolkoff's concerns and warning via email to the Trumps said, these events are in the president-elect's honor at his hotel, and one of them is for family and close friends. Please take into consideration that when this is audited, it will become public knowledge. Well, all of that was not heeded. On January 10th, 2017, Trump's inaugural committee agreed to a contract that would enrich the Trumps at the rate of $175,000 per day, more than twice the amount per day that Wolkoff told Ivanka and Rick Gates, remember him, at that point, the deputy inaugural chairman, should be paid for the use of their own space. According to the lawsuit, the charges included rental fees for days when the Trumps weren't even throwing any events. Donald has said he was too busy dealing with the transition to worry about the inauguration. And Ivanka has said she was only around for an initial meeting. But Racine has email receipts showing that Ivanka was very much privy to Wolkoff's concerns. The stories of financial fraud carried out by Trump and his inaugural committee have slowly dribbled out over the past couple of years. Big ticket items are being investigated by federal prosecutors in New York, with subpoenas getting sent out, subpoenas, as investigators try to figure out how all of this money, around $107 million from private, quote, donors, was being spent and who was pocketing it. The complaint asks that at least $1 million be put into a trust and be restored to a proper public purpose by directing the funds to another nonprofit entity dedicated to promoting civic engagement of the citizens of the United States of America. You know, in other words, they're going nowhere with all of this. But very interesting, and just one of, I think, 3 currently burning controversies centered on Trump's intentional price spiking to gouge his own supporters. And they're happy to do it, and they won't show up as witnesses against him, I guess, unless maybe somebody becomes disgruntled at some point. Or maybe Gordon Sondland will come and be a witness to this, because, of course, he gave $1 million to Trump's inauguration in order to become ambassador, and it's been nothing but trouble for him ever since. So I wonder whether that bothers him at any point, and whether he comes to make this complaint. I don't know. Plenty more, of course, to catch up on, but I thought that was probably the most important of the bunch, and we are, of course, running out of time rather quickly. Let's see. Oh, yeah, something we're going to have to discuss tomorrow. Just want to drop this one on your lap. I happened to see this one, and, this one will come in for closer examination. Maybe it's something we can do on a Friday. I noticed the tweet of David Graeber, anthropologist, is how he identifies himself here in his Twitter bio. And he says this in sending along a clip from Jacobin magazine, which is we've referenced before and needs close reading in order to know what to make of it. But he says, so it's official. Ronald Reagan became the president of the United States, that is, by committing the crime of high treason. Acting like that. To offer to pay a declared enemy not to release American officials that they held hostage is about as clear an example of treason as you can get. He's talking, of course, about the October surprise issue in what later also became grew even further into the Iran-Contra scandal as well. But this was the pre-election October surprise in which he spoke with the Iranians and basically convinced them, if you just continue to hold those hostages until after Election Day, and in fact release them only upon my inauguration, then everyone will be, of course, down on President Carter in his re-election bid and reject him for having failed to resolve this crisis and want new leadership, and that'll be me, and we'll work something out on the side. So, pretty damn interesting. We'll have to take a look at that one. That, of course, between that and Iran-Contra and torture and indefinite detention and the Trump debacles, there hasn't been a legitimate Republican president since Eisenhower. And probably some of the older among you can come up with a complaint about him, too. We'll leave that to Justice Putnam, who brings us the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy next. I don't know that he's ever had a problem with Eisenhower, but I bet he can come up with one.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Let's take a look internationally here at the chef's table. French Senate. The French Senate has passed a bill allowing in vitro fertilization for single women and lesbian couples. And in an Olympic year, Japan faces a decision over radioactive contaminated Fukushima water. How do you like that? Don't bottle it and sell it. We won't.